I spent $400,000 building a custom lakeside villa as a surprise for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. But when I pulled into the driveway to hand them the keys, my heart dropped. My elderly father was standing on the curb holding garbage bags full of his clothes, while my brother's wife ushered a group of tourists through the front door. She looked right at me, smirked, and announced that my gift was now a family asset, generating passive income. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was inside the briefcase sitting on my passenger seat. My name is Emma, and I am 33 years old. Before I dive into the rest of this disaster, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had your generosity weaponized against you by toxic family members. For the past 8 years, I have worked relentlessly as a commercial real estate developer in Manhattan. I do not build small residential projects. I build high-rises, boutique hotels, and luxury commercial spaces. I fought tooth and nail in a cutthroat industry to earn every single dollar to my name. But to my family, my success was only valuable when it could be used to clean up my older brother Jason's messes. Jason is 35, and the undisputed golden child of the family. Growing up, my parents Richard and Susan enabled his terrible decisions at every turn. If Jason wrecked a car, my savings were drained to cover it. If Jason failed a business venture, my parents took out loans to bail him out. And when he married Jasmine, an African-American woman who treated designer labels like a personality trait and viewed hard work as a personal insult, the financial drain only multiplied. Despite the blatant favoritism, a part of me still craved my parents' approval. I wanted to do something monumental to show my love. I purchased a pristine half-acre lot in an exclusive, highly regulated ecological preserve on Lake George in upstate New York. Over 6 months, I entirely funded and managed the construction of a breathtaking modern lakeside villa. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows, heated hardwood floors, and a wrap-around deck overlooking the water. It was meant to be their retirement sanctuary, a place where my father could fish and my mother could read completely mortgage-free. I arranged to hand over the keys on the afternoon of their anniversary. I drove 3 hours north from the city, a bottle of expensive vintage champagne resting securely on the passenger seat of my car. The autumn leaves were brilliant shades of amber and crimson reflecting off the glass-like surface of the lake as I finally pulled into the private gated driveway. I felt a rare sense of pride. I could not wait to see my mother cry tears of joy. But as the tires crunched against the fresh gravel, the knot of anticipation in my stomach instantly turned to pure ice. There, standing on the edge of the driveway, was my 62-year-old father, Richard. He was not holding a celebratory drink or smiling. He was holding a battered suitcase and 2 heavy black garbage bags full of clothes. He looked exhausted, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other as he stared at the ground. Before I could even put the car in park, the custom cedar front door of the villa swung wide open. Out walked Jasmine. She was wearing a silk designer blouse and oversized sunglasses, looking like she owned the entire county. Behind her, a family of 5 tourists in matching neon windbreakers were dragging wheeled luggage across the pristine, custom-milled oak floors I had personally selected just weeks prior. I threw my car door open and marched toward the porch, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Dad, what is going on here? Why are your bags out on the driveway? Who are these people inside my house?" My father refused to meet my eyes. He stared firmly at the gravel, his shoulders slumped. "Well, Emma, it is just that we decided to make a change. I will tell you exactly what is going on." Jasmine interrupted, her voice dripping with unearned authority. She strutted down the porch steps, her heels clicking loudly against the stone walkway. She gestured expansively toward the confused tourists. "These lovely people are from Ohio. They have just checked in. This property is now a family asset, and Jason and I are optimizing its revenue stream." I stared at her, genuinely trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. Optimizing. Jasmine. "I built this house for my parents to live in. It is their anniversary present. It is not a cheap hotel." Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She adjusted her sunglasses and looked at me as if I were a slow child. "Emma, please. Look around. This house is way too big for 2 seniors to manage. Plus, Jason and I have a baby on the way. We have a future to build. Your brother and I decided to list it on a short-term rental site. We have already secured a massive corporate booking for the entire winter." "You did what?" I demanded, the blood rushing to my face. I turned sharply back to my father. Dad, tell me you did not agree to this. I literally sent the contractor away yesterday. The paint is barely dry. My father finally looked up, his expression, a frustrating mix of guilt and total submission. Your mother and I talked about it, Emma. Jason is in a bit of a tight spot financially right now. We are just going to rent a room at the budget motel down the highway for a few months. It is really not a big deal. We just want to help your brother get back on his feet. Help him get back on his feet. I snapped, my voice echoing off the quiet lake. You are going to live in a roach-infested motel off the highway so he can pimp out the $400,000 house I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. That was when the front door opened again and Jason stepped out onto the porch. He leaned casually against the doorframe, sipping from a coffee mug I had specifically bought for my mother. He wore a smug, relaxed smile that instantly transported me back to every single time he had gotten away with destroying something of mine in our childhood. Lower your voice, Emma, Jason said smoothly, not a hint of shame in his eyes. You are upsetting the paying guests. They paid a premium for a quiet lakeside retreat, not a front row seat to one of your emotional meltdowns. I stepped up onto the bottom stair of the porch, entirely ignoring the tourists who were now awkwardly lingering in the foyer. My emotional meltdowns. Jason, get these people out of my house right now. You do not have the right to rent this property out to anyone. Jason chuckled, walking down the steps to wrap his arm possessively around Jasmine. Correction, little sister. It is not your house anymore. You gifted it to Mom and Dad. And Mom and Dad, being the generous, family-oriented people that they are, realized that their son needed the capital much more than they needed a fancy vacation home. I stared at him. The sheer entitlement in his voice made my blood boil. Capital. Is that what we are calling your staggering financial incompetence now? What exactly did you do this time, Jason? Did you blow another angel investment? Did you gamble away another business loan? Jasmine stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her hip. Do not speak to my husband like that. For your information, Jason had a temporary setback with his cryptocurrency portfolio. The market fluctuated. We currently have $50,000 in credit card debt. Unlike you sitting in your fancy Manhattan office hoarding your wealth, your parents actually care about their grandchild's future. I looked between the two of them in absolute disbelief. So let me get this straight. I spent over a year navigating local zoning boards, hiring the best architects in the state, and draining my own personal savings to build a handicap-accessible state-of-the-art home so our parents would not have to climb stairs in their old age. And your brilliant solution to your own reckless spending is to kick them out onto the street and turn their anniversary present into a frat house. It is not a frat house. Jasmine snapped, her voice rising an octave. We are charging $800 a night. We are running a premium hospitality business. You should be taking notes, Emma. This is how you generate real passive income. Jason needed capital to leverage his next venture. The rental market here is booming. We already collected a $100,000 advance for a 6-month corporate retreat booking starting next week. The cash is already in our checking account. We used a portion to buy luxury linens. The delusion was staggering. You let strangers sleep in the beds I bought for Mom and Dad. You stole a house. I turned to my father, who was still avoiding eye contact. Dad, tell me you did not actually agree to this madness. I literally sent the contractor away yesterday. The paint on the trim is barely dry. Before my father could speak, my mother Susan emerged from the side of the house. She carried a cardboard box of kitchen spices and framed family photos. She looked tired, but the moment she saw me, her expression hardened into the familiar look of maternal disappointment she usually reserved only for me. Please stop shouting, my mother said, setting the box down on the sedan. It makes perfect financial sense. Jason and Jasmine are struggling right now. You have plenty of money. Why do you always have to be so selfish? Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had just handed them a custom-built house worth $400,000 entirely free and clear, and somehow I was still the selfish one. I am selfish. I asked, my tone dropping to a sharp whisper. Mom, I paid for this. Not Jason. Not Jasmine. I did. Every single nail, every piece of glass, every permit. And we thanked you for the beautiful gift, Susan replied smoothly, not missing a beat. But once you give a gift, you do not get to dictate how it is used. We chose to use it to help your brother. Family helps family, Emma. I know you have been living in the city so long you have forgotten what that means, but in this family we do not let each other drown. You let me drown all the time. I yelled, the 33 years of repressed anger finally bubbling to the surface. When I needed a student loan co-signer, you refused. But you took out a second mortgage for Jason's failed startup. While I ate ramen in a tiny studio, you bought Jason a brand new car. Keep your voice down, Jason hissed, glancing nervously at the tourists who were now whispering to each other on the porch. You are embarrassing yourself in front of our clients. No, I said, taking a deep breath and squaring my shoulders. The hurt that had lived in my chest for my entire life suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold and sharp clarity. I was no longer the wounded daughter seeking their approval. I was Emma, the commercial real estate developer, who routinely destroyed multi-million-dollar hedge funds in boardroom negotiations. I want these people out. Now. I stated firmly, pointing at the tourists. And I want you and Jasmine off this property immediately. If Mom and Dad do not want to live here, that is fine. But you are not running a hotel out of this building. Jasmine smirked, crossing her arms over her designer blouse. She looked incredibly pleased with herself. You cannot make us do anything. In fact, you have absolutely zero legal standing here right now. Zero legal standing. The ridiculous words hung heavily in the crisp autumn air like a thick, toxic cloud. I looked directly at Jasmine, whose smug, painted grin was so incredibly wide it almost looked physically painful. I turned back to my mother, desperately expecting her to finally wake up and correct this highly absurd statement. Instead, Susan just nodded solemnly, as if Jasmine had just recited a profound and universal truth. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Zero legal standing. I wired the funds for this entire property. I hired the contractors. I spent weeks arguing with the city over zoning permits. I picked out the very oak floorboards those strangers are currently scuffing up with their rolling luggage. How exactly do I have no legal standing in a house that I built from the ground up? Susan stepped forward and reached out to place a hand on my arm. I flinched and pulled away immediately. She let out a long, dramatic sigh, effortlessly slipping into her favorite role as the long-suffering victim. Emma, you told us this house was ours. You said it was a gift. And as the legal owners of a gift, we have the absolute right to do what we see fit with it. Jason came to us crying last week. He was so incredibly stressed about the new baby coming, and the credit card companies were calling him day and night. You know how sensitive your brother is to financial stress. Sensitive to stress. I echoed, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound disappointment. He is a 35-year-old man who buys luxury watches instead of paying his own mortgage. I stared past her at my father, who was now carefully arranging a large black garbage bag full of heavy winter sweaters into the trunk of his rusted sedan. He actively refused to look my way, unable to face his own daughter. My mother continued, her voice taking on that familiar condescending tone she had used on me since childhood. You have always been so independent, Emma. You never really needed us. You moved away to the city, made all that money, and left us behind. Jason needs us. He has always needed our guidance. When you coldly refused to give him that business loan last year, you left him in a terrible position. We had to fix it. We always have to fix it. This is simply us fixing it again. The memory of that infamous loan hit me like a physical blow. Last year, Jason wanted $100,000 to invest in a friend's shady cryptocurrency startup. I reviewed the amateur business plan and told him it was a blatant scam. I flatly refused to fund it. My parents called me heartless and greedy. They ended up foolishly cashing out a massive chunk of their own hard-earned retirement savings to voluntarily give him the money. The startup folded 3 months later, taking every single penny of their retirement with it. And now, to make up for that devastating loss, they were literally handing over the keys to the sanctuary I had built for them. I looked past my brother and his wife staring at the house. Through the large architectural glass windows, I could clearly see the oblivious tourists from Ohio opening the brand-new stainless steel refrigerator. I watched closely as they inspected the kitchen I had lovingly custom designed, with special pull-down shelving specifically meant for my mother's severe arthritis. One of the men was already sitting on the pristine white linen sofa, putting his dirty hiking boots squarely on the custom marble coffee table. You are letting them ruin it, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I built this place so you would not have to struggle anymore, and you are throwing it all away for a guy who has never worked a hard day in his entire life. Jason took an aggressive step forward, his chest puffed out defensively. Watch your mouth, Emma. I am an entrepreneur. I take calculated risks. Sometimes they do not pan out, but I am building an empire for my family. Jasmine and I are going to manage this property, scale the monthly revenue, and eventually buy more units. We are turning your little anniversary gift into a generational wealth vehicle. Generational wealth? I could not help it. I laughed right in his face. You cannot even manage a basic checking account without overdrawing it, Jason. You are going to manage a luxury rental property. Jasmine rolled her eyes dramatically. We are already managing it perfectly. The guests are checked in. The money is sitting in the bank. And your parents are happily relocating so we can secure our financial future. You should be proud of us. Instead, you are throwing a childish tantrum because you are no longer the center of attention. I looked back at my father. He slammed the trunk of the car shut. He walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. I called out, desperate for a shred of reason. Are you really going to do this? Are you really going to drive to a roadside motel on your 30th wedding anniversary just because Jason cannot stop maxing out his credit cards? My father finally met my gaze. His eyes were tired and utterly defeated. We have to, Emma. He is our son. He is going to give us a grandchild soon. We have to make sacrifices. It is what loving families do. He got into the car and started the engine. The old motor sputtered and coughed loudly, providing a stark, pathetic contrast to the sleek, modern mansion looming directly behind him. My mother gave me one last disapproving glare before walking over and climbing into the passenger seat. They were actually leaving. They were abandoning the dream home I built for them to go sleep on a stained mattress in a budget motel, all to subsidize my brother's delusion. I stood frozen on this driveway, watching my father's rusted sedan disappear down the winding road. My own parents had just driven away from a $400,000 custom-built luxury home to sleep in a roadside motel. They did it willingly. They did it to protect a 35-year-old man who was currently grinning at me from the front porch. Jasmine walked slowly down the steps, the gravel crunching beneath her expensive designer heels. You can stop looking so dramatic, Emma, she said, her voice dripping with pure condescension. You act like you gave them the moon. It is just a house. Anyone with a checkbook can hire a contractor. You just threw money at a problem because you lack any actual emotional connection to this family. I turned my attention to her, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I threw money at a problem, Jasmine. I spent an entire year designing every single inch of this place. I built a heated fishing dock for my father. This was not a real estate investment. It was an act of love. Jasmine scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Please, you did it for your own ego. You wanted to play the role of the rich, successful savior to make Jason look bad. But Jason is the one with actual vision. He saw an underutilized asset and immediately figured out how to monetize it. That takes business acumen. You just build things. Jason builds wealth. We are taking this family to the next level, and you are just mad because we outsmarted you. Outsmarted me. I repeated the words slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of her statement wash over me. I looked past her shoulder. Inside the house, the tourists from Ohio were fully settling in. I could practically hear the deep scratches forming in the wood. A woman in a neon windbreaker was haphazardly tossing heavy suitcases onto the pristine white linen sofa. They were treating my masterpiece like a cheap highway rest stop. Jason walked down to join his wife, slipping his hand comfortably into hers. He looked at the tourists inside and smiled proudly, completely blind to the damage they were already causing. Look at that, Emma. Passive income in action. In fact, since the first $100,000 already cleared our account, Jasmine and I decided to host our own little celebration here this afternoon. Your celebration. I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Yes, Jasmine chimed in, her eyes gleaming with greed. We are hosting a catered garden party on the back lawn to celebrate our new business venture. We invited about 50 of our friends from the city. They should be arriving in a few hours. We are using the advance money to network and find new investors for our next property. I stared at them. They had not only stolen my parents' anniversary present to pay off their own credit card debt, but they were also using the rental advance to throw themselves a lavish party on my dime. They were going to parade around my property drinking expensive champagne, acting like self-made real estate moguls in front of their pretentious friends. You are going to throw a party here, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Jason nodded, completely misreading my calm demeanor as defeat. Exactly. And honestly, Emma, you are welcome to stay if you want. You could learn a thing or two about networking. Maybe you could even help point people toward the portable toilets we rented. We do not want too many people using the indoor plumbing and ruining the septic system." He wanted to parade me around in front of his friends as the defeated younger sister. He wanted me to watch him play the role of the successful patriarch while my actual parents sat in a motel room eating cheap takeout. A strange sense of absolute tranquility suddenly washed over me. The anger completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I realized in that exact moment that fighting with them was entirely pointless. They were so deeply entrenched in their own delusions of grandeur that words would never reach them. They needed to feel harsh reality crash down on them. They needed to believe they had completely won before I pulled the rug out from under their feet. I looked at Jason taking in his smug smile and his expensive watch. I looked at Jasmine admiring her designer clothes purchased with stolen money. "You know what, Jason," I said softly. "I think I will stay for the party. I would love to see your grand vision in action. I would love to see exactly how you manage this new generational wealth. See? I knew you would eventually come around to my way of thinking." Jason turned his back to me, satisfied with his victory. He walked up the porch steps, joining their guests. The heavy door shut, leaving me standing alone. I stared at where my parents had just parked. I needed to hear it directly from my father without Jason breathing down his neck. I quickly started my Audi. I knew exactly which budget motel they were heading to. It was the only one within a 10-mile radius, a run-down cinder-block building sitting right off the noisy interstate. I pulled out of the gated driveway and drove down the winding road, the autumn scenery now feeling entirely hollow. It took me less than 10 minutes to find them. Their rusted sedan was parked awkwardly outside room 12. The neon sign above the office flickered with a harsh buzzing sound. Paint was peeling off the exterior walls in ugly flakes, and a faint smell of stale cigarettes hung in the cold air. It was a miserable place miles away from the luxurious heated floors and lakeside views I had meticulously designed for them. I parked my car next to theirs and stepped out. The door to room 12 was propped wide open. My father was inside, struggling to lift a suitcase onto a flimsy luggage rack. He looked incredibly small and frail under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the cheap room. "Dad," I said softly, standing rigidly in the doorway. He flinched slightly and turned around. When he saw me, his shoulders slumped further in defeat. "Emma, what are you doing here? You should not have followed us." I stepped into the cramped room. "Dad, please. I need you to look at me and tell me the honest truth. Did you really want to give Jason the house? Did you really want to spend your 30th wedding anniversary in a depressing place like this?" He looked down at his worn leather shoes, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the cheap mattress. I could clearly see the profound exhaustion etched deeply into the lines of his face. "It is not about what I want, Emma." Jason was desperate. He came to us crying uncontrollably. He said the credit card companies were preparing to sue him. Jasmine was threatening to take the baby and leave him forever if he did not fix their finances immediately. What was I supposed to do? Watch my son's life completely fall apart when I had a perfectly good, highly valuable asset sitting right there. But it was not your asset to give away. I pleaded, trying hard to keep my voice steady. It was a personal gift from me to you, to keep you safe and comfortable. You let him steal from me. My father looked up. His eyes filled with a pathetic mixture of guilt and weak defensiveness. "We did not steal anything from you. We just reallocated it for the family. Jason promised he would pay us back completely once the rental business took off. He said we could move into the house next year." "Do you actually believe that?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "Has Jason ever paid you back a single dime in his entire life?" Before he could answer my question, the bathroom door swung open and my mother walked out. She froze instantly when she saw me, her eyes narrowing into a harsh, unwelcoming glare. Susan marched forward quickly and stood directly between me and my father, shielding him like I was a physical threat. I thought we made ourselves perfectly clear back at the house. Susan snapped tightly, crossing her arms across her chest. "Leave your father alone right now. He is already stressed enough without you constantly badgering him about money." "I am not badgering him, Mom. I am trying to understand why you both are willingly throwing away your own comfort for a man who constantly uses you." "We are parents." "Emma," Susan hissed, her voice dripping with extreme self-righteous indignation, "you do not have children, so you cannot possibly understand this sacrifice. You never abandon your child when they are drowning. Jason desperately needed a lifeline today." You gave us a house, and we chose to use it to save our son. You should be happy we found a way to keep this family intact. I looked past her shoulder to my father. He actively refused to meet my eyes again. He simply nodded his head in silent agreement with her absurd logic. In that cramped, dingy motel room, a chilling realization finally washed over me. I finally saw the truth. They were entirely willing accomplices. I turned and walked out. They had made their bed. I shifted into drive and headed back to the house. I had a leather briefcase to open. The drive back from that depressing roadside motel took less than 10 minutes, but in that short span of time, my entire worldview permanently shifted. The lingering guilt, the desperate need for my parents' validation, the ingrained instinct to keep the peace at my own expense, all of it simply evaporated. I was no longer the scapegoat sister. I was a professional who dealt with hostile takeovers for a living, and my brother had just initiated a hostile takeover of my property. I pulled my Audi back into the gated driveway of the lake house. The scene had already escalated. 2 white catering vans were illegally parked on the freshly laid sod of the front lawn. Men in white aprons were carrying large trays of expensive appetizers and crates of top-shelf liquor toward the backyard. Jason and Jasmine were throwing the event of the season, using the advance money from their illegal rental business. I turned off the engine, reached over to the passenger seat, and grabbed my leather briefcase. The lock clicked under my thumbs, a sharp metallic sound that felt incredibly satisfying. I stepped out of the car and walked straight through the custom cedar front door, not bothering to knock. The tourists from Ohio were lounging in the living room. The father was trying to figure out how to use the high-end smart home entertainment system I had installed, aggressively pressing buttons on the wall panel. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the catering crew bustling in the kitchen. The family turned to look at me, startled. "I am Emma, the real estate developer who built this property. I need to inform you that this house is not a licensed short-term rental. The people who took your money committed fraud. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your belongings and vacate the premises." The mother of the group stood up, her face flushing with anger. "What are you talking about? We paid $10,000 for the week. We are not going anywhere." Before I could calmly explain the situation to her, the heavy glass sliding doors from the patio slid open. Jasmine stormed into the living room, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. Jason was right behind her, his smug smile finally replaced by a look of genuine panic. "Emma, what is your problem?" Jasmine shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands balled into tight fists. "Stop harassing our guests. You are going to ruin our reviews." "Your reviews are the least of your concerns right now," I replied, maintaining a perfectly level tone. "I told you to get these people out of my house. Since you refused, I am doing it myself. If they are not gone in 30 minutes, I am calling the local sheriff to report a break-in and illegal trespassing." Jason stepped in front of Jasmine, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. "You are not calling anyone, Emma. You are acting completely unhinged. You need to leave right now before I have security throw you out." I did not flinch. "Security? Jason, you cannot even afford your own car insurance. You do not have security. Now get out of my way." Jasmine let out a sharp, triumphant laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. She reached into her expensive leather tote bag sitting on the kitchen island. "Oh, Emma, you really think you hold all the cards just because you paid the construction crew? You are so naive. Did you really think Jason and I would launch a premium hospitality business without covering our legal bases first?" She pulled out a thick manila envelope, dramatically untying the string closure. She retrieved a crisp stack of legal documents and practically shoved them into my chest. "Read it and weep," she sneered. I took the documents and glanced at the first page. It was a general power of attorney. The headers were drafted by a cheap online legal service, but the signatures at the bottom of the page were entirely real. I recognized my father's shaky handwriting and my mother's loopy cursive immediately. Beside their names was the official stamp and signature of a public notary dated just 2 days ago. Jason crossed his arms, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "That is right. Mom and Dad legally appointed me as their attorney, in fact. I have the absolute legal authority to manage, lease, or sell any and all assets in their name. Since you gifted them this house, it belongs to them. And since I manage their estate, I manage this house. You have zero authority here." Jasmine leaned in close, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You lose, Emma. You built a beautiful house and now we are going to get rich off it. So take your little leather briefcase, get back in your car, and drive back to your miserable, lonely life in the city. Do not let the door hit you on the way out. I looked down at the notarized document in my hands. To an average person, this piece of paper would be a devastating blow. It looked official. It looked bulletproof. It gave Jason complete control over our parents' lives. But I was not an average person. I was a commercial real estate developer, and looking at that ridiculous piece of paper, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. I smoothed out the crease in the cheap printer paper and handed the notarized document back to Jasmine. I kept my expression completely blank. Jason took my silence as a total surrender. He puffed out his chest and took a step forward, practically vibrating with unearned pride. You see? Emma, Jason said, his voice loud enough for the confused tourists in the living room to hear. Dad finally realized that he needed someone with actual business acumen to handle the family portfolio. As the legally appointed manager of the estate, it is my fiduciary duty to maximize our assets. You might have paid for the raw materials, but I am the one providing the strategic vision. I am protecting our parents' retirement. Protecting their retirement. The sheer audacity of his statement was almost physically repulsive. I looked at my brother, a man, wearing a fake luxury watch he bought on credit, and let my mind drift back to the first time he ever managed our family finances. I was 18 years old. I had just been accepted into a top-tier university. My grandfather had left me $40,000 in a dedicated college savings account. It was my ticket out of that toxic household. But my parents, in their infinite wisdom, had kept Jason as a joint signer on the account in case of a medical emergency. Jason decided that my freshman year was the perfect time for an emergency. He convinced my parents that higher education was a scam and that he had found a guaranteed investment in a revolutionary energy drink startup. Without asking me, he drained my entire college fund and handed it over to a guy he met at a local gym. The company filed for bankruptcy 30 days later. The founder fled the state. My $40,000 vanished into thin air. I spent the next 4 years working 3 miserable minimum wage jobs and taking on massive student loans just to keep my head above water, while Jason walked away without a single consequence. My parents simply called it a tough learning experience for him and told me to stop holding a grudge. And now this same man was standing in the middle of a custom-built luxury home, claiming he was the guardian of the family portfolio. I see, I said, keeping my tone remarkably even. So you are the legal manager of the estate now. That is a very impressive title, Jason. Tell me, as the manager, have you reviewed the specific tax implications of running a commercial enterprise in an ecologically protected residential zone? Jason waved his hand dismissively, clearly annoyed that I was not breaking down in tears. Do not try to bore me with your bureaucratic zoning nonsense, Emma. We have an accountant. We are running everything through the proper channels. Jasmine has already set up the corporate paperwork. Jasmine nodded vigorously, crossing her arms. That is right. We are completely insulated from any personal liability. We are operating as a legitimate corporate entity. You are just trying to use big words to scare us, because your little plan to be the family savior completely backfired. I nodded slowly, pretending to digest this incredibly flawed legal theory. A legitimate corporate entity. That is fascinating. So this power of attorney gives you the absolute right to lease assets owned by Mom and Dad. Exactly. Jason snapped, pointing a finger at my face. So stop harassing our paying guests and get out of our house. We have a catered garden party to host and you are killing the vibe. The mother of the tourist family from Ohio stepped forward, looking incredibly uncomfortable. She clutched her purse tightly against her chest. Excuse me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. We do not want any trouble. If there is a dispute over the ownership of the property, we would prefer to just get a full refund and find another place to stay. Jasmine immediately spun around, her aggressive demeanor softening into a sickeningly sweet customer service smile. Oh, absolutely not. There is no dispute at all. My sister-in-law is just having a minor emotional episode. She is leaving right now. Please go enjoy the lake. There are fresh towels in the master suite. I looked at the terrified family, then back to my brother and his wife. They were so incredibly confident in their stolen authority. They genuinely believed that a basic boilerplate document they downloaded off the internet gave them the power to conquer the world. I knew that if I kicked the tourists out right now, Jason and Jasmine would just play the victims. They would spin the narrative, cry to my parents, and claim I ruined their brilliant business venture out of pure jealousy. I needed a bigger audience. I needed them to publicly claim ownership of their fraud before I destroyed it. I took a step back toward the front door. You know what, Jason? You are absolutely right. You have a notarized document. You are the manager of the estate. Who am I to stand in the way of your brilliant strategic vision? Jason smirked, crossing his arms. Glad you finally came to your senses. I am going to head to the backyard, I said casually. I think I would like a glass of that expensive champagne you bought with the advance money. Let us see how the new real estate moguls entertain their guests. I walked through the expansive kitchen and pushed open the heavy glass doors leading to the back patio. The crisp autumn air hit my face, carrying the smell of expensive catered food and the heavy bass of a live DJ. I stood on the edge of the custom mahogany deck I had designed specifically for my father to enjoy his morning coffee. It had been completely transformed into a pretentious networking mixer. There was absolutely no sign that this was supposed to be a 30th wedding anniversary celebration. There were no silver banners blowing in the wind. There were no framed photos of my parents displaying their 3 decades of marriage. There was no anniversary cake waiting to be cut. Instead, the sprawling green lawn was covered with white linen cocktail tables, an extravagant oyster bar, and a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a dollar sign. Jasmine had taken the $100,000 advance from the illegal corporate booking and thrown herself a massive launch party. She invited her entire social circle from the city. The backyard was filled with about 50 people I had never seen before in my life. There were crypto bros in tailored suits aggressively pitching tech startups. There were social media influencers holding up glasses of vintage champagne, taking selfies with the lake in the background. It looked like a cheap parody of wealth. I walked slowly down the steps and merged into the crowd. Nobody paid any attention to me. To them, I was just another guest at Jasmine and Jason's lavish estate. I watched a waiter walk by carrying a silver tray of caviar blinis. I grabbed one and took a bite. It was delicious. It was also paid for with stolen money and built on the foundation of my parents' displacement. I spotted Jasmine standing near the edge of the heated infinity pool I had installed for my mother's water therapy. She was holding court with a group of women wearing identical oversized designer sunglasses. Jasmine was speaking loudly, making sure everyone around her could hear her exaggerated success story. We just knew we had to diversify our portfolio, Jasmine said, taking a sip from her crystal flute. Jason has such an incredible eye for undervalued properties. We saw this little lake house and immediately knew its potential. We did a complete gut renovation. It was exhausting, but you have to put in the sweat equity if you want to see real returns in this market. I stopped dead in my tracks. A complete gut renovation. She was actually claiming she built this house. She was standing on the cedar decking. I paid for looking at the custom windows I sourced and taking complete credit for every single ounce of my hard work. One of the women gasped in admiration. That is so inspiring, Jasmine. Managing a massive renovation while pregnant takes so much dedication. Are your in-laws still involved in the property at all? Jasmine waved her hand dismissively, letting out a heavy sigh. Oh, Richard's parents are sweet, but they are from a different generation. They do not understand the aggressive nature of modern real estate. We let them stay here for a few days as a little vacation, but we had to transition them out to a smaller place. This property is strictly a revenue-generating asset now. It is all about building generational wealth for the baby. The women nodded solemnly, completely buying into the fabricated narrative of Jasmine, the visionary matriarch. I felt a sharp twinge of absolute disgust. She did not even mention the 30th anniversary. My parents were sitting in a depressing motel room on a highway right now, genuinely believing they had made a noble sacrifice to save their son from financial ruin. Meanwhile, their son and daughter-in-law were using their stolen gift to buy social status and fresh oysters. I kept walking through the crowd, my eyes scanning the yard for my brother. I found Jason standing by the outdoor kitchen I had built. He was talking to a group of men wearing expensive loafers without socks. Jason had a cigar in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. He looked exactly like a man who had won the lottery without buying a ticket. I am telling you, the short-term rental market upstate is an absolute gold mine, Jason boasted loudly. You just have to know how to leverage your assets correctly. I secured a $100,000 corporate booking before the paint was even dry. My sister thought I was crazy, but she just does not have the stomach for high-level investments. She plays it too safe and works a boring corporate job." The men laughed, raising their glasses in a toast to Jason's supposed financial genius. I stood a few feet away, completely invisible to him. I watched him soak up their admiration, feeding his massive ego with lies. He was completely detached from reality. He genuinely believed his own narrative. He believed he was a self-made millionaire because he held a piece of paper he manipulated our parents into signing. I looked down at my hands. The stage was perfectly set. They had their fake empire built on sand. It was time to burn it all down. I stepped further into the crowd, maneuvering past the cocktail tables and ice sculpture. Before I found a quiet corner, a sharp voice cut through the chatter and bass of the DJ. "Emma, what are you standing around for?" I turned to see Jasmine marching toward me. She held a crystal flute in one hand and a crumpled napkin in the other. She looked me up and down, her expression contorting into a mask of pure annoyance. "If you stay at our party, make yourself useful," Jasmine commanded, shoving the sticky napkin into my hand. "The catering staff is overwhelmed. Go into the kitchen and tell the servers to bring out more crab cakes, and clear those empty glasses from the tables near the pool. We have important investors here, and I will not have this looking like a frat house." I looked down at the crumpled napkin, then back up at her perfectly contoured face. She was not joking. She genuinely wanted to use me as unpaid help at a party funded by the illegal rental of my property. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the napkin back in her face and caused a scene, but causing a scene would only validate their narrative that I was an unstable, jealous sister. Instead, I offered her a tight smile. "Of course, Jasmine. I will get on that." Her eyes widened, surprised by my sudden compliance, but her massive ego quickly overpowered any suspicion. "Good," she snapped, turning her back. "Make sure the crab cakes are actually hot." I walked over to the nearest table and picked up 3 empty flutes. I carried them toward the kitchen, acting the part of the obedient servant. As I walked, I overheard snippets of conversation from the guests. They praised Jason and Jasmine for their real estate foresight. A man in a tailored suit asked Jason for advice on identifying undervalued properties. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh out loud. I spent the next 20 minutes clearing plates and wiping down tables. Every time Jason caught my eye, he would smirk and subtly point to another piece of trash for me to pick up. He was thoroughly enjoying my public humiliation. He was finally the king of the castle, and I was just a peasant sweeping his floors. Suddenly, the loud music faded out. Jasmine stood on the elevated tier of the mahogany deck, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal glass. The sharp, high-pitched ringing commanded the immediate attention of the entire yard. "Excuse me, everyone," Jasmine called out, her voice amplified by the sudden silence. "If I could just have your attention for a brief moment." The crowd gathered around the base of the deck, raising their glasses in anticipation. I stood near the patio edge, holding a tray of dirty appetizers, blending perfectly into the background. "I want to thank you all for coming out to Lake George today to celebrate our brand new hospitality venture." Jasmine began beaming down at the crowd. As many of you know, building a real estate portfolio from the ground up takes an incredible amount of grit, sacrifice, and strategic vision. It is not for the faint of heart. She paused dramatically, placing a loving hand on Jason's shoulder as he stepped up to join her on the elevated deck. He wrapped his arm around her waist, looking out at the crowd with the unearned confidence of a self-made billionaire. "But we did not do this just for ourselves," Jasmine continued, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "We did this for our family. Recently, my wonderful husband stepped up to rescue his parents from a very difficult financial situation. When others in this family decided to selfishly turn their backs on them, Jason took complete legal control of the family assets. He made the hard choices. He turned this underutilized vacation home into a premium cash-flowing asset." A gentle murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. A few people nodded respectfully at Jason. "He is the true savior of the family finances," Jasmine declared loudly, raising her glass high into the air. "He protected his parents' retirement and secured a beautiful future for our unborn child. So please raise your glasses to my incredible husband, the smartest investor I know, Jason." To Jason, the crowd chanted in unison, taking sips of their expensive champagne. Jason smiled modestly, taking the microphone from the DJ stand. "Thank you, Jasmine. And thank you all. It really comes down to recognizing value where others are completely blind. You must be willing to take the asset, cut out the emotional dead weight, and optimize it." He looked directly at my face as he loudly said the words, "emotional dead weight." The crowd erupted into applause, completely oblivious to the massive lie they were celebrating. A few of the men patted Jason on the back, while Jasmine beamed beside him, playing the role of the supportive, successful wife. I stood perfectly still, balancing the silver tray of dirty appetizer plates on my fingertips. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was almost impressive. He was not just stealing my property. He was stealing my entire identity. He was standing on the deck I designed in the backyard I landscaped, using the money I earned to publicly brand me as a failure. I did not throw the tray. I did not scream. I simply walked over to a nearby catering station and gently set the dirty dishes down on the white linen tablecloth. I wiped my hands on a cloth napkin. The anger that had been simmering inside me all afternoon suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. It was cold. It was precise. It was the exact feeling I got right before closing a brutal corporate acquisition. Just as I discarded the napkin, I felt a sharp, continuous buzzing in the pocket of my slacks. I reached in and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with 3 consecutive text messages from Diana, my executive assistant back in Manhattan. Diana was sharp, ruthless, and highly efficient. When I had left the budget motel earlier, I had made a 2-minute phone call to her, giving her a very specific list of urgent tasks. I opened the message thread. The first text read, "HOA, board president has been contacted." I sent him the link to the live rental listing and the photos of the catering vans parked on the grass. He is absolutely furious. The ecological preserve bylaws strictly prohibit any commercial activity. Maximum daily fines are being drafted right now. I smiled slightly and read the second message. I ran the tax identification numbers. Jasmine registered the short-term rental income using her personal social security number to get the direct deposit advance. I just submitted the expedited fraud report to the IRS tip line. She is officially on their radar for operating an unlicensed commercial business. The third and final text was the absolute best one. The county sheriff dispatch has confirmed receipt of the trespassing complaint. A patrol car is en route to the property to remove unauthorized commercial occupants. Estimated time of arrival is 20 minutes. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest since I first pulled into the driveway completely vanished. The trap was set. The legal mechanisms were already in motion, moving with the crushing, indifferent weight of the American justice system. Jason and Jasmine thought they had outsmarted me with a cheap online legal form. They thought they were playing checkers, moving pieces around a board they barely understood. They had no idea I was playing 3-dimensional chess. My entire demeanor shifted. I stood up straighter, rolling my shoulders back. The submissive, defeated sister was gone. I walked away from the catering station, heading straight toward the sliding glass doors. "Emma, where do you think you are going?" Jasmine called out sharply. She had stepped down from the deck and was marching toward me, an empty champagne flute in her hand. "The caterers need help bringing out the main course. Stop standing around and make yourself useful." I did not even break my stride. I walked right past her, ignoring her entirely. "Excuse me, I am talking to you," Jasmine hissed, grabbing my upper arm to stop me. I stopped and looked down at her hand, then up at her face. My expression was so incredibly blank, so completely devoid of any emotion, that she instantly let go. "Do not ever touch me again, Jasmine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough cold authority to make her take a physical step back. I turned away and walked through the sliding glass doors, stepping back into the living room. The tourists from Ohio were still there, unpacking groceries in my custom kitchen. I ignored them too. I walked straight down the hallway, pushed open the heavy cedar front door, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. My Audi was parked exactly where I had left it. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. I had brought the leather briefcase inside earlier, but realizing I needed the full legal dossier to properly dismantle them in public, I had tossed it back onto the leather seat when I went to confront the tourists. I reached in and grabbed the thick, heavy handle. This briefcase did not hold cheap internet printouts. It held certified deeds, municipal zoning maps, and ironclad corporate ownership structures. It held the absolute destruction of Jason's fake empire. I closed the car door, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet driveway. I gripped the briefcase tightly, feeling the smooth leather against my palm. I turned around and walked back toward the house, my heels striking the pavement with deliberate, rhythmic purpose. It was time to stop cleaning up their messes. It was time to end the party. I gripped the handle of my leather briefcase and walked around the side of the house. The heavy bass from the backyard DJ pulsed against the cedar siding. I bypassed the catering vans and stepped back onto the grass. The party was in full swing. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and completely buying into the fraudulent empire my brother had constructed. I did not stop at the catering table this time. I did not pick up any dirty plates. I walked with my head held high, my eyes fixed directly on the elevated mahogany deck where the DJ had set up his equipment. A few guests in tailored suits glanced at me, probably wondering why a woman who had just been clearing appetizers was now marching through the crowd carrying a professional corporate briefcase. I ignored them entirely. My focus was absolute. I reached the base of the deck and climbed the 3 wooden steps. The DJ, a young man wearing a graphic tee and oversized headphones, was bobbing his head with one hand on his digital turntable. He looked up, his expression shifting to pure confusion as I stepped directly into his workspace. I did not ask for permission. I reached right past him and grabbed the spare wireless microphone resting on his table. Before he could protest, I looked down at his mixing board and pushed the main master volume slider all the way down. The heavy bass line vanished instantly. The sudden suffocating silence washed over the entire backyard. It was completely deafening. Conversations came to a screeching halt. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward the deck simultaneously. People lowered their crystal champagne flutes, looking around in utter confusion. I scanned the crowd and found Jason and Jasmine standing near the massive ice sculpture. Jason's smug, self-satisfied smile melted into a harsh scowl the second he saw me standing in front of the audio equipment. Jasmine aggressively pushed past a group of bewildered tech investors, her face flushed with absolute fury. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly and crisply across the manicured green lawn. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to your afternoon networking event. I know you were all having a wonderful time celebrating this brand new generational wealth vehicle." Jasmine marched right up to the base of the wooden deck, her eyes wide with rage. Emma put the microphone down. "Right now," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low but failing miserably. "You are acting completely unhinged. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are ruining our corporate launch. Put it down before I have you physically removed from the premises." I looked down at her and offered a perfectly calm, chilling smile. "You do not have security, Jasmine. And I am entirely sober. I just thought it was only fair that I add a few factual words to the beautiful toast you gave earlier. After all, a launch party this extravagant deserves absolute transparency." I shifted my gaze back to the crowd of confused guests. "A few minutes ago, my brother Jason stood up here and told you all a deeply inspiring story. He told you about his immense grit, his personal sacrifice, and his brilliant strategic vision. He told you that he heroically stepped up to save his elderly parents from severe financial ruin. He painted himself as the visionary who took control of an underutilized family asset and turned it into a premium hospitality business. It was a fantastic story, truly worthy of a Hollywood script." Jason started aggressively walking toward the deck, his face turning an angry, volatile shade of red. "Emma, shut your mouth and get off my property right now. I am the legal manager of this estate. I have the notarized power of attorney. If you do not step down, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." "You can call the police, Jason," I replied directly into the microphone, making sure every single person in the yard heard me with crystal clarity. "In fact, I highly encourage it. Because the story you just told these people is a complete fabrication. Every single word of it was a lie designed to cover up a massive, highly illegal financial fraud." Loud gasps erupted from the crowd. Whispers broke out across the lawn like a sudden wave. The crypto investors exchanged nervous, calculating glances. A few of the social media influencers actually pulled out their phones and started recording the confrontation. This was no longer a boring networking mixer. This was a front-row seat to a spectacular corporate collapse, and nobody wanted to miss a single second of it. "My name is Emma," I announced, projecting my voice with absolute unwavering authority. "I am a commercial real estate developer based in Manhattan, and I am not a jealous younger sister throwing a childish tantrum. I am the sole person who financed, designed, and built the very house you are standing behind. I paid for the ground beneath your feet. I paid for the deck I am standing on. And I am here to tell you exactly how Jason and Jasmine funded this little party. I am going to show you the truth behind their so-called empire, and I promise you it is not something you want to invest your hard-earned money in." Jason stopped at the base of the deck, pointing his finger at me. "You are completely delusional, Emma," he shouted, trying to regain control of the narrative. I have the notarized power of attorney from Mom and Dad. They gifted me control of this property. I have the legal right to manage it, lease it, and throw you off it. You are just a bitter contractor who wants credit for my vision. I did not argue with him. I simply lifted my heavy leather briefcase and set it down flat, right on top of the DJ's mixing board. The solid thud echoed through the microphone still resting in my other hand. The entire crowd watched in breathless silence as I flicked the brass latches open. The sharp clicks sounded like a bank vault unlocking. A power of attorney is a very powerful document, Jason, I said calmly, looking down at the neat stacks of paper inside my briefcase. It allows you to make medical decisions. It allows you to manage bank accounts. It even allows you to lease or sell real estate. But there is one very specific catch to a power of attorney. It only applies to assets that the person actually owns. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a blue legal cover. I held it up for the crowd to see. For those of you who are taking notes on how to build a real estate empire, please pay close attention. When I purchased this half-acre lot last year, I did not put it in my parents' names. I did not put it in my own name either. I purchased it through a legally registered limited liability company called Lakeside Holdings LLC. I flipped to the second page of the document. Lakeside Holdings LLC is registered in the state of New York. And if you look at the corporate charter, you will see that I, Emma, am the sole managing member and 100% equity owner of that company. My parents have zero ownership stake in Lakeside Holdings. They do not own a single share. Therefore, Jason, your little power of attorney has absolutely no jurisdiction over this property. Jason blinked, his arm slowly lowering to his side. His face contorted in confusion, trying to process the legal terminology. That is a lie. He stammered, his voice losing its booming confidence. You said this house was a gift. You gave it to them. I gave them a place to live, I corrected him, my voice echoing across the silent lawn. I gave them peace of mind. But I am a commercial real estate developer, Jason. I do not hand over $500,000 assets without protecting my investment. I reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of heavy watermarked paper. I held it up high. The afternoon sun caught the raised gold seal of the county clerk's office. This is the official property deed. It was filed and recorded with the county just 3 weeks ago. The grantee listed on this deed is Lakeside Holdings LLC. My parents' names do not appear anywhere on this document. They never owned the dirt beneath your feet. They never owned the lumber in these walls. And they certainly never owned the right to turn my property into a cheap party venue. A low murmur swept through the crowd of investors. A few of the men in tailored suits actually winced, immediately recognizing the catastrophic legal position Jason was in. He had taken their money and pitched them a business model based on an asset he had absolutely zero legal right to operate. Jasmine pushed her way to the front, her face pale but her eyes still burning with desperate defiance. You are bluffing, she shrieked. You are just making this up to embarrass us. The guests inside already paid us. The money is in our bank account. We have a lease agreement. A lease agreement with who, Jasmine? I asked, leaning slightly over the deck railing. Did my father sign a commercial lease with your hospitality company? Because if he did, he committed fraud. You cannot lease a house you do not own. It is a fundamental principle of property law. I looked out at the guests, specifically targeting the crypto bros and tech investors who had been cheering for Jason just minutes prior. My brother and his wife did not discover an underutilized asset. They did not secure a brilliant corporate booking. They broke into my house, changed the locks, and illegally rented it out to strangers while I was in the city. They took a $100,000 advance for a property they have absolutely no claim to. And they used that stolen money to buy the champagne you are all drinking right now. The reaction was instantaneous. Several people immediately set their crystal flutes down on the nearest tables, as if the glass had suddenly caught fire. The social media influencers stopped recording and looked around nervously, suddenly realizing they were attending a party funded by grand larceny. Jason stood completely frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring blankly at the deed. His smug smile was entirely gone, replaced by pure terror. His smug smile was entirely gone, replaced by pure terror. He stared at the watermarked deed in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. The silence in the backyard was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. I slowly lowered the deed and placed it neatly on top of the mixing board. I was not finished. I reached into my leather briefcase one more time to retrieve the final nail in the coffin of his fake empire. I pulled out a thick, stapled packet of paper with a bold red header and held it up for everyone to see. "This is the residential occupancy agreement I carefully drafted for my parents," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly steady and clear. "It is a very specific legal mechanism known in real estate law as a life estate. I formally granted Richard and Susan the legal status of life tenants. That means they had the absolute right to live in this beautiful house for the rest of their natural lives, completely rent-free. It was my gift to them, a secure, comfortable place to age gracefully without ever worrying about a mortgage or property taxes. But a life tenancy is not fee-simple ownership." I continued pacing slowly across the deck. "It comes with extremely strict, non-negotiable conditions. Section 4 of this exact contract explicitly prohibits any form of subleasing, short-term renting, or commercial exploitation. It strictly states that the property can only be used as a primary personal residence for the named life tenants. My parents only possess the right of personal occupancy. They never possess the right of commercial alienation. You cannot sell what you do not own." I stopped pacing and looked directly down at Jason, who was now sweating profusely in the cool autumn air. "So when Mom and Dad signed that cheap power of attorney you printed off the internet, they were assigning you a right they never actually possessed. A life tenant cannot authorize a third party to run a hotel out of a property they do not own. Legally speaking, Jason, your entire business model is built on a completely void contract. You leased this property illegally." The crypto investors standing near the ice sculpture began to murmur angrily. One of them, a tall man in a tailored navy suit, stepped forward and pointed an accusing finger at Jason. "You told us you owned this place free and clear," the investor snapped loudly. "You told us this was the anchor property for your new hospitality portfolio. You took our seed money based on a complete lie. You are a complete fraud." Jason held his hands up defensively, taking a nervous step back. "No, wait, you do not understand. She is twisting the facts. My parents gave me the house. They told me I could use it. They are my parents. It is a family asset. We just had a slight miscommunication regarding the corporate structuring. I can fix this." "A slight miscommunication." I repeated his words, letting a sharp laugh escape my lips. "You broke into a house owned by a corporate entity. You changed the locks. You accepted $100,000 in advance bookings for a property you have zero legal claim to. That is not a miscommunication, Jason. That is grand larceny. That is criminal fraud, and you know it." Jasmine shoved her way to the front of the crowd again, her face flushed with desperate panic. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You cannot do this, Emma. You cannot just invalidate our business because of some technicality in a contract nobody ever read. Your parents moved out. They voluntarily left the premises. That means the house was empty and abandoned. We simply took over the management of an abandoned property to protect it from falling into disrepair." I looked at Jasmine and shook my head in utter disbelief at her sheer ignorance of the law. "You really should have hired a real lawyer instead of using free legal websites, Jasmine. Because if you had, they would have explained Section 7 of the life tenant agreement to you." I opened the packet and read directly from the page. Section 7. Abandonment of premises. If the life tenants voluntarily vacate the property and establish a primary residence elsewhere, the life estate is immediately and permanently terminated. The right of occupancy instantly reverts back to the sole managing member of Lakeside Holdings, LLC. I closed the packet and looked back at my brother and his wife. "Do you understand what that means, Jason? When you convinced Mom and Dad to pack their bags and move into that disgusting budget motel down the highway, you did not just steal their anniversary gift. You legally terminated their life tenancy. By handing you the keys, they forfeited their own right to ever live in this house again. You made them homeless just so you could play pretend real estate mogul for one afternoon." The weight of my words hung in the air, suffocating the remnants of their fake celebration. The investors were actively backing away from Jason, now treating him like a walking liability. Jason looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, his shoulders slumped, unable to form a coherent sentence. He finally understood that he had legally stripped our parents of their only secure home. The golden boy had flown entirely too close to the sun, and his wax wings had melted, but Jasmine was a different breed. Where Jason folded under the crushing weight of legal reality, Jasmine simply doubled down. She was cornered, and like any predator caught in a trap, she bared her teeth. Jasmine marched up the wooden stairs of the deck, inserting herself directly between me and her terrified husband. She slammed both hands down on the mixing board right next to my pristine property deed. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Emma?" She spat, her voice trembling with raw panic and arrogance. "You think walking out here with a briefcase full of technicalities changes anything in the real world? It does not. You can wave those papers around all you want, but you are completely missing the most important fact. We already won." I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. "You won?" I asked, keeping my tone deadly calm. "You just committed a felony in front of 50 witnesses, Jasmine. What exactly did you win?" "I won the only thing that actually matters," she shouted, gesturing wildly toward the house. "The money. The cash is already in our bank account, Emma. $100,000. It cleared yesterday morning. It is secure. It is ours. The corporate clients from Ohio paid for a 6-month continuous block, and they are already completely unpacked in the master bedroom. You can stand out here and preach about life estates and corporate ownership until you are completely blue in the face, but possession is 9/10 of the law. Those guests have a signed contract with my hospitality company, and they are not leaving." A few of the guests in the crowd groaned audibly at her profound ignorance. It was a spectacular display of financial illiteracy. She genuinely believed that possessing stolen funds validated the theft. Jasmine turned to address the crowd, desperately trying to salvage her shattered image. "Do not listen to her," she yelled, her voice bordering on hysterical. "She is just a bitter woman who hates seeing her brother succeed. We have the money, we have the leverage. She is not going to physically drag a family of 5 out of that house. She does not have the guts." She spun back around to face me, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "So go ahead, Emma. Call your fancy corporate lawyers. File a civil lawsuit. Dispute the occupancy. I know exactly how the legal system works. By the time a judge even looks at your paperwork, it will be next year. We will have already collected another $100,000 in booking fees. We will drag the litigation out for years, and we will use the revenue from your own house to pay our legal defense. You cannot touch that money. It is locked away." I watched her chest heave up and down as she laid out her brilliant master plan. She was banking on the notoriously slow gears of the civil justice system. In a normal landlord and tenant dispute, she might have actually been right. Evicting a squatter or fighting a fraudulent lease in civil court can be an agonizing, expensive process that takes months of endless mediation. She thought I was going to hand her a polite eviction notice and wait 30 days. She thought she had effectively checkmated me using the buffer of bureaucratic delays. I slowly reached out and picked up my microphone. The cold metal felt incredibly grounding in my hand. "Jasmine," I said, my voice echoing loudly across the silent property. "You are absolutely right about one thing. Civil court is incredibly slow. It requires a massive amount of patience. And if I were relying on a civil judge to resolve this little family dispute, you might actually get away with living off my stolen property for the next 6 months. Jasmine smirked, crossing her arms in victory. "I told you that you lose. Now take your briefcase and get off our property before I call the cops." I smiled back at her, a genuine, terrifying smile. "But I am not taking you to civil court, Jasmine. I simply do not have the time or the patience for legal mediation. You see, when you decided to steal my property, you made one catastrophic mistake. You violated the strictly enforced and highly specific zoning laws of this entire county." Jasmine burst into a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Zoning laws?" She repeated the words mockingly, throwing her hands up. "You are threatening me with zoning laws. Are you actually serious right now, Emma? You think a bunch of bored retirees on a local municipal board are going to swoop in and save your precious house?" I kept my posture straight, watching her completely unravel. "I am completely serious, Jasmine. This is an ecological preserve. The regulations here are not just suggestions." Jasmine scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting a fly. "Please, I have done my research. I know exactly how these small-town committees operate. They send a strongly worded warning letter. Then they give you 30 days to respond. Then they schedule a public hearing for the following quarter. By the time they actually issue a fine, we will have already made our money and moved on to the next investment. It is the cost of doing business." Jason, sensing a lifeline in his wife's aggressive confidence, quickly stepped up beside her. He adjusted his suit jacket, trying to project authority to the nervous crowd of investors. "My wife is absolutely right," he proclaimed, his voice regaining a fraction of its former boom. "Every major real estate developer deals with minor zoning infractions. It is just bureaucratic red tape. We pay a small administrative penalty, and we keep operating. The revenue far outweighs the risk." He turned to the investors, offering them a reassuring smile. "Do not let my sister scare you. She works in corporate real estate. She does not understand the aggressive strategies required for short-term rental growth. The capital is completely secure. We have the $100,000 sitting safely in our business checking account right now. No local zoning board can reach into our bank and take that money back." Jasmine stepped closer to the edge of the deck, looking down at me with pure venom. "You hear that, Emma? You are totally powerless. Go ahead and march down to the town hall. Fill out your little complaint forms. File your civil disputes. By the time any judge or inspector physically forces those tourists out of the master bedroom, I will have already transferred the funds to an offshore holding account. We are going to milk this property for every single cent it is worth, and you are going to sit on the sidelines and watch us do it." I listened to her lay out her grand criminal strategy in front of 50 witnesses. She was so incredibly proud of her own perceived cunning. She genuinely believed that the legal system was a sluggish, toothless beast that she could easily outrun. She thought the $100,000 advance was her ultimate shield, a pile of cash making her completely untouchable. "You really think this is a game?" I asked softly, my voice carrying an icy edge. "You think you just found a clever loophole in the system?" "I know I did," Jasmine sneered. "Because while you were busy picking out custom floorboards and playing the perfect daughter, I was figuring out how to actually extract value from this family. The money is mine. The house is occupied. You lost. Now take your briefcase, get in your car, and go back to the city. We have a party to finish." She turned her back to me, clearly expecting the confrontation to be over. She reached out to grab a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter, ready to resume her celebration. Jason mirrored her arrogance, giving me a dismissive wave before turning back to his wealthy friends. They were so blinded by greed that they completely failed to understand the environment they were standing in. They thought they were dealing with a standard suburban neighborhood, where neighbors occasionally complained about loud music. They did not understand that an ecological preserve in upstate New York operates under an entirely different set of rules. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I looked at the crowd, then at my brother. "Jason." I called out, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the guests. "You keep talking about the cost of doing business. You keep talking about small administrative penalties. But you failed to read the specific charter of the Lake George Homeowners Association." Jason paused, glancing back over his shoulder. He frowned, clearly annoyed that I was still speaking. "The HOA. Who cares about the HOA? They just care about what color you paint your mailbox." I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Not this HOA, Jason. This is a highly restricted conservation zone, and the people who run it do not send warning letters. They take immediate action. They have the absolute legal authority to freeze everything. You are completely finished." Jason stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. "The HOA." He finally managed to choke out a laugh, though it sounded incredibly hollow and desperate. "You are threatening me with a neighborhood watch committee. What are they going to do, Emma? Give me a sternly worded citation for having too many cars in the driveway. Tell me my grass is too long. I have $100,000 in corporate backing. I can afford to pay whatever petty little $50 fine they slide under the door." I shook my head, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "You should have read the property disclosures before you decided to play landlord, Jason." I reached back into my open briefcase and withdrew a thick leather-bound booklet. The gold lettering on the front cover caught the crisp afternoon sunlight. "This is the official charter for the Lake George Ecological Preservation Board. It is not a neighborhood watch committee composed of bored housewives. It is a legally recognized regulatory authority backed by the State Department of Environmental Conservation." I opened the booklet to a page I had heavily bookmarked with bright red sticky notes. When I purchased this specific lot, I had to sign a binding covenant acknowledging that this land sits on a highly protected watershed. The bylaws here are designed to prevent exactly what you are doing. Section 12, Paragraph 4, strictly prohibits any commercial enterprise, including short-term rentals, corporate retreats, and paid hospitality services, It is a zero-tolerance policy designed to stop massive crowds from overwhelming local septic systems and destroying the fragile shoreline. Jasmine crossed her arms, though her manicured fingers were trembling visibly against her silk blouse. So we break a minor rule. Big deal. Like Jason said, we will just pay the fines. We have the capital to absorb minor operational costs. You are just trying to use big legal words to intimidate us, because you know you cannot actually get those tourists out of the house today. You are not listening to me, Jasmine, I said, projecting my voice, so the remaining investors could hear every single devastating detail. This is not a simple parking ticket. The Preservation Board does not issue polite warnings. When an unauthorized commercial event is detected on a protected lot, the board is legally mandated to take immediate emergency action to halt the ecological threat. I pulled out my phone and held it up high, and I know they are taking action because I personally called the board president 20 minutes ago. I sent him a direct link to your rental listing and photographs of these massive catering vans tearing up the protected grass. A wave of frantic whispers swept through the crowd. The caterers, sensing the impending legal disaster, quietly began packing up their expensive silver chafing dishes and loading them back into their vehicles. Jason swallowed hard, a heavy bead of sweat tracing its way down his temple. You called them. You reported your own property. Why would you do that? You are just going to get yourself massively fined. No, Jason, I replied smoothly. The property owner is not liable if the commercial activity is the direct result of criminal trespassing. I submitted the police report establishing that you and Jasmine broke into my house and changed the locks without my consent. That completely shields my corporate entity from any financial liability. However, it places the absolute entirety of the legal burden squarely onto your shoulders. You are the unauthorized operators. You are the ones who signed the catering contracts. You are the ones who took the advance money. I stepped closer to the edge of the deck, my eyes locked firmly onto his pale, terrified face. The Preservation Board has the absolute authority to issue an immediate stop work order. But more importantly, because you are not the legal owners of this house, you have absolutely zero standing to dispute their swift actions. You cannot appeal to the committee. You cannot request a public hearing. You are legally classified as hostile squatters running an illegal business on ecologically protected land. Jasmine lunged forward, her voice cracking with sheer desperation and fury. We have a lease. We have the power of attorney. We are not squatters. I pointed a firm finger right at her chest, dropping my voice to a lethal quiet register. I just proved to 50 witnesses that your power of attorney is completely worthless. My parents could not authorize a commercial lease because they were merely life tenants. Your entire operation is a phantom, Jasmine. You have no lease. You have no ownership. You just have a massive mountain of liability and angry investors wondering why they gave you their seed money. Jasmine opened her mouth to scream another insult, but no sound came out. She looked frantically at Jason, waiting for him to step up and defend their grand business model. But Jason was completely paralyzed. He stared blankly at the leather-bound charter book in my hand, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. He finally grasped the sheer magnitude of the disaster he orchestrated. But Jasmine, driven by pure greed and a refusal to admit defeat, forced a loud, dismissive scoff. A fine is just a fine, Emma, she snapped, crossing her arms tightly across her chest to stop her hands from shaking. You are acting like we committed murder, so the Preservation Board issues a penalty. What is it? $500, $1,000. I told you we have $100,000 sitting in our corporate checking account. We will write them a check tomorrow morning, tell them we made an administrative error, and keep right on operating. It is a minor inconvenience. I smiled. It was a cold, pitying smile that made her flinch. You really think the Lake George Ecological Preservation Board issues $500 fines for commercial exploitation? I asked, my voice echoing across the silent lawn. I opened the leather booklet again, flipping to the penalty schedule section. Let me read this out loud so your investors can fully understand the operational costs of your new hospitality venture. I held the booklet up and read clearly. Article 4, Section 9. Any unauthorized commercial activity including short-term rentals, corporate events, and paid hospitality services constitutes a severe ecological threat. The mandatory administrative penalty for such a violation is $10,000 per day. I paused, letting the number hang in the crisp autumn air. $10,000. Per day. Gasps erupted from this crowd of guests. The tall, navy-suited investor let out a sharp curse. $10,000 a day, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Jason. You told us the overhead on this property was basically zero. I am not finished, I said loudly, cutting through the rising panic. I looked back down at the charter. Furthermore, each distinct commercial activity on the property constitutes a separate daily violation. I closed the booklet and looked directly at Jasmine, who had suddenly turned the color of chalk. Let us do some basic math, Jasmine. You have unauthorized guests occupying the main residence. That is one violation. $10,000. You hired a commercial catering company to park heavy vans on the protected shoreline grass. That is a second violation. Another $10,000. You hired a professional DJ and set up commercial audio equipment in a designated quiet zone. That is a third violation. So, just for today, your little administrative error has racked up $30,000 in immediate fines. Jason stumbled backward, his back hitting the wooden railing of the deck. 30,000, he whispered, his eyes wide with absolute horror. And that is just for today, I reminded him cheerfully. You said the tourists from Ohio booked a 6-month stay, right? That is roughly 180 days. At $10,000 a day, just for the occupancy violation alone, you are looking at $1.8 million in fines by the time their stay is over. Jasmine shook her head vigorously, taking a step back. No, that is illegal. They cannot fine someone $10,000 a day. That is extortion. No judge would ever uphold that in court. It is not a municipal court fine, Jasmine, I explained patiently, enjoying the absolute terror washing over her face. It is a private homeowners association covenant. It is a legally binding contract, tied to the land, which has been upheld by the state Supreme Court dozens of times. They absolutely can, and they absolutely will, enforce every single penny of it. She swallowed hard, her arrogant facade completely crumbling. Well, they can fine you then, she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. It is your LLC. You own the property. You are the one on the hook for the fines, not us. We are just the managers. I shook my head slowly. I already explained this to you. The board places the liability on the unauthorized operators when criminal trespassing is involved. My police report completely clears my LLC. The fines go directly to the individuals operating the illegal business. That is you and Jason. Jason suddenly grabbed his hair, letting out a strangled sound of pure panic. We cannot pay $30,000 today, he yelled at his wife. Jasmine, the advance money is gone. We spent $20,000. Jasmine flinched as Jason screamed at her in front of their wealthy guests. She looked around frantically, realizing her image of a successful socialite was shattering into pieces. We had to spend that money to make money, Jason, she hissed back, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. We had to pay the caterers and rent the DJ equipment. We had to look the part, so these investors would give us more capital. Jason grabbed his own hair, his face a mask of pure despair. Look the part. We are going to lose everything. I stepped forward, breaking up their little marital dispute. Actually, Jason, the $30,000 you owe the homeowners association today is just the beginning. I reached back into my briefcase. The preservation board operates locally, but when you run an illegal enterprise and accept a $100,000 advance, you invite the federal government. Jasmine froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the leather briefcase. What are you talking about now, Emma? I pulled out a single sheet of printed paper. This was a copy of the public tax registry for the short-term rental platform they had used to secure their corporate booking. Legitimate companies must provide a valid employer identification number and proof of ownership. But since you do not actually own Lakeside Holdings, LLC, you could not provide those documents. The platform would have rejected your application instantly. I walked down the steps of the deck, holding the paper out so Jason could read it. But Jasmine bypassed the corporate verification process entirely to get that massive payout immediately. She registered the commercial property using her own personal social security number. She listed herself as a sole proprietor. Jason slowly turned his head to look at his wife. His eyes were wide with a new, much more profound kind of terror. Jasmine, tell me you did not do that. Tell me you did not tie your personal social security number to an illegal $100,000 wire transfer. Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. It was the only way they would release the funds today. She defended herself, her voice shaking uncontrollably. I was going to move it to a corporate account next week. It does not matter. It is just a tax form. It is not just a basic tax form, Jasmine, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. When you accepted that money under your personal identity for a property you do not legally own, you committed wire fraud. By not declaring your unlicensed commercial business, you also committed federal tax fraud. The navy-suited investor who had spoken up earlier let out a sharp, disgusted sigh. He turned to his colleagues. These people are entirely toxic. They are operating a federal tax fraud scheme. If the IRS audits them, anyone who invested seed money into their fake portfolio will be subpoenaed. We need to leave right now. The remaining guests never hesitated. The sudden mention of the Internal Revenue Service was the ultimate deal-breaker. The investors turned in unison and marched toward the front gate. They abandoned their champagne glasses on the lawn. Nobody thanked Jasmine for the expensive caviar. They fled the property entirely. Jason watched his entire network, his future investors, and his fake social standing walk out the gate. He turned back to me, his shoulders completely slumped. Emma, please. You made your point. You humiliated us. Let us give the money back to the tourists and we will leave. We will not bother you again. Do not report this to the IRS. I am your brother. I looked at him feeling zero pity. You are a little too late for negotiations, Jason. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tapped the screen. I did not just drive up here to give a speech. While you were toasting your fake genius, my assistant ran background checks on your listing. She discovered the Social Security discrepancy an hour ago. She forwarded your information, the fraudulent lease and bank routing numbers, to the IRS criminal tip line. You are officially on the federal radar. Jasmine let out a piercing shriek. She lunged at me, trying to snatch the phone away. You vindictive witch! You ruined my life! Jason caught her around the waist, pulling her back. Stop it, Jasmine! He yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. Assaulting her is not going to delete an IRS report. We are going to federal prison. I placed my phone back into my pocket, maintaining my composure. I did not ruin your life, Jasmine. You ruined it yourself the second you decided to steal my parents' gift. The federal government does not care about your ego. Your paper trail leads directly to a prison sentence. The absolute finality of my words seemed to literally drain the remaining color from Jason's face. He stumbled backward and sat down hard on one of the white linen cocktail chairs, burying his face in his hands. Jasmine stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing silently. The few remaining guests were practically sprinting toward the front gate to escape the blast radius of their impending federal indictment. Just as the last catering van hastily backed out of the driveway, the familiar sputtering sound of a failing engine cut through the tense silence. My father's rusted sedan pulled slowly through the open iron gates, awkwardly navigating around the fleeing luxury vehicles. They parked near my Audi, and my parents stepped out. They looked completely exhausted. My father was holding a plastic bag of cheap takeout food from the motel, and my mother was clutching her purse tightly. They had clearly returned to grab something they had forgotten, or perhaps the reality of the roach-infested motel had driven them back to beg Jason for a guest room. They walked toward the backyard, stopping dead in their tracks when they saw the deserted lawn, the abandoned champagne glasses, and Jason sitting with his head in his hands. Jason, what is going on here? My mother asked, her voice trembling as she hurried over to him. Susan dropped her purse on a table. Why is everyone leaving? What happened to your big investor presentation? Jason could not even look at her. He just shook his head, letting out a pathetic, dry sob. I stepped forward, my briefcase resting securely in my hand. I will tell you exactly what happened, Mom. Your golden child just publicly admitted to grand larceny, violated a strict ecological covenant to the tune of $30,000 in daily fines, and committed federal wire fraud using Jasmine's social security number. The IRS Criminal Division is currently reviewing their file. My father dropped the bag of takeout food. The plastic containers hit the grass with a dull thud. He stared at me, then turned his horrified gaze toward Jason. Tax fraud. Jason, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not mess with the IRS. Jason looked up, his eyes red and frantic. I did not know, Dad. Jasmine handled the platform registration. She just wanted the cash advance quickly. We were going to fix the paperwork later. Jasmine whipped around, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. Do not you dare put this all on me. You are the one who told me to get the money today so we could pay for this stupid caterer. It was your idea to forge the corporate documents. Susan gasped, taking a physical step back from her beloved son. You forged corporate documents. Jason, How could you be so incredibly stupid? You promised us this was a perfectly legal, foolproof business venture. You looked me right in the eyes in that motel room and swore you had consulted an accountant. I did. Jason cried out defensively. I read an article online. You read an article online. Richard shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. You convinced us to sign away our rights to a $400,000 home. You forced us to move into a filthy roadside motel, and you based your entire financial strategy on an internet article. The illusion of the brilliant, misunderstood entrepreneur instantly evaporated. My parents finally saw Jason for exactly what he was. He was not a victim of bad luck. He was a reckless, arrogant liability who had just dragged their family name into a federal criminal investigation. Susan grabbed her purse, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her keys in the grass. Emma, what if the IRS looks into our accounts? We co-signed his car loan last year. We share a joint checking account for his emergency funds. Will they freeze our retirement money? I looked at her, the final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. They might, Mom. If the federal government suspects you received any portion of that stolen $100,000, they will freeze every single asset tied to your name, pending a full audit. My mother let out a strangled wail. She turned on Jason like a rabid animal. You selfish, arrogant fool. You told us our money was safe. You told us this was passive income. It was supposed to be. Jason yelled back, tears streaming down his face. Emma ruined it. She called the HOA. She called the IRS. She did this to us. Susan spun around to face me. Her previously condescending demeanor vanished entirely, replaced by raw, trembling panic. Emma, please, you have to fix this. You know how the corporate world works. You have high-powered lawyers. Call the IRS right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them your company authorized the rental. I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold detachment. Tell them my company authorized a fraudulent rental. You want me to perjure myself to federal agents and risk my own real estate license to save the man who just stole my property? You have to! Emma, my father pleaded, walking over and reaching out as if to grab my arm. I stepped back, refusing to let him touch me. He is your brother. If he goes to federal prison, his life is over. What about Jasmine? What about the baby? You cannot just stand by and let your own nephew grow up with parents in jail. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life prioritizing my brother's comfort over my basic needs. You knew he was stealing from me, I said quietly but firmly. You sat in that motel room and told me that giving away my gift was the right thing to do. You actively participated in his scheme because you thought he would get away with it. You only care about the law now because he got caught. Emma, we made a terrible mistake. Susan cried, actual tears finally spilling down her cheeks. We were desperate. We just wanted him to be successful for once. We are so sorry. Just call your assistant. Have her cancel the fraud report. We will make Jason give the money back. We will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them take my son away. I looked down at my mother. I cannot cancel a federal fraud report, Mom, I stated flatly. The IRS does not operate like a customer service hotline where you can call and say you changed your mind. The wire transfer is already flagged. The paper trail is permanently established in their system. If I try to cover it up now, I become an accessory to federal tax evasion. I am not throwing away my career, my real estate license, and my freedom to shield a man from the consequences of his greed. Hearing the absolute finality in my voice, Jasmine snapped. The supportive wife persona completely shattered. She spun around and shoved Jason hard in the chest. You absolute loser, she screamed. You told me this was a foolproof plan. You promised me this property was legally yours to leverage. I put my social security number on that application because you swore your credit was temporarily locked. You lied to me. Jason stumbled backward, his hands raised defensively. I did not lie, Jasmine. I thought the power of attorney covered it. I was just trying to get us the capital we needed for the baby. We needed cash fast. Do not use my baby as an excuse for your staggering incompetence, Jasmine shrieked. You have not made a single intelligent financial decision since the day I met you. You blew through our wedding savings on that crypto scam last year. You maxed out my personal credit cards to buy those luxury watches so you could look rich. And now you have dragged me into a federal criminal investigation. I am filing for divorce the second we get back to the city. I am not going to prison because I married an idiot. Jason looked destroyed. His wife was leaving him. His fake real estate empire was entirely gone. He was facing millions in HOA fines and federal prison time. Instead of taking accountability for his actions, his eyes darted around the yard until they landed squarely on our parents. He pointed an aggressive finger at our father. "This is your fault," he shouted, his face contorting with desperate rage. Richard took a physical step back, visibly stunned by the sudden attack. "My fault? Jason, you forged corporate documents. You lied to the government." "Yes, your fault," Jason yelled. "You and Mom told me I was destined for greatness. You bailed me out of every single problem. When I asked for the house, you should have told me no. You should have hired an attorney to review the paperwork before you handed me the keys. You set me up to fail. You handed me a loaded gun, and now you are mad that it went off." Susan gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Jason, how can you say that to us? We moved into a filthy motel for you. We gave up our 30th anniversary gift because you came to us crying about your debts. We did this out of love, and you were foolish to do it." Jason snapped back, completely devoid of empathy. "You are my parents. You were supposed to protect my future. You should have known Emma would set a legal trap. You should have researched the zoning laws. You completely failed me as parents, just like you failed at planning your own retirement." The golden child illusion collapsed, shattering on the pristine lawn. For 35 years, Richard and Susan had worshipped the ground Jason walked on. They had sacrificed my college fund, my emotional well-being, and ultimately, their own secure home, all to feed his sense of entitlement. They believed they were nurturing a misunderstood business genius. Instead, they had successfully engineered a deeply toxic monster who would gladly throw them under a moving bus the second he faced any real adversity. I watched my parents' faces crumble as the reality of their parenting choices washed over them. My father looked 10 years older, his shoulders slumped in defeat. My mother simply stared at Jason, her eyes wide with a profound regret. They had spent their entire lives betting all their money on the wrong horse, and now the race was over. Jasmine let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "Look at you, Jason. A grown man blaming his mommy and daddy because he cannot read a simple contract. You are utterly pathetic." The argument exploded into a chaotic shouting match. Jasmine screamed about contacting a divorce attorney. Jason yelled at our parents for ruining his life. My mother sobbed uncontrollably into my father's shoulder. I stood silently on the deck watching the toxic family dynamic that had tormented me for decades finally consume itself entirely. Their screaming echoed across the manicured lawn, a harsh and ugly sound that sharply contrasted with the serene beauty of the lake behind them. Jason was red in the face, violently gesturing at our father while Jasmine aggressively tapped away on her phone, presumably already looking up divorce lawyers in the city. My mother was practically hyperventilating, leaning heavily against the outdoor kitchen counter. None of them noticed the sudden change in the atmosphere, but I did. Through the dense canopy of autumn trees lining the private road, a distinct pattern of flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the glass surface of the lake. The distant crunch of heavy tires rolling over gravel grew steadily louder. Within seconds, a white SUV with the Lake George Ecological Preservation Board logo emblazoned on the side pulled through the open iron gates. Right behind it was a dark green county sheriff patrol cruiser. The flashing lights swept across the backyard, casting long, erratic shadows over the abandoned cocktail tables and the melting ice sculpture. The sudden visual intrusion of law enforcement acted like a bucket of ice water thrown directly onto a raging fire. Jason's screaming stopped mid-sentence. His jaw dropped open. Jasmine froze, dropping her phone onto the grass. My mother let out a terrified gasp and hid her face in her hands. Two uniformed sheriff deputies stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. They were imposing figures strictly professional and clearly unamused by the scene in front of them. From the white SUV emerged Mr. Abernathy, the notoriously strict president of the Homeowners Association. He was a tall, older man with a stern face holding a clipboard and a digital camera. He immediately began snapping photos of the caterer's tire tracks, ruining the protected shoreline grass and the commercial DJ equipment set up on the deck. "Who is the registered property owner here?" The taller of the two deputies called out, his authoritative voice instantly commanding absolute obedience from everyone in the yard. Jason took a tentative step backward, his previous bravado completely vanishing. He looked at Jasmine, then at our parents, desperately hoping someone else would speak. Nobody did. They were entirely paralyzed by the sheer gravity of the situation. The fake empire was gone, replaced by the crushing reality of the criminal justice system. I calmly walked down the wooden steps of the deck, carrying my leather briefcase. I approached the officers with measured, confident strides. "I am officer," I stated clearly, stopping a respectful distance away. "My name is Emma. I am the sole managing member of Lakeside Holdings, LLC, the corporate entity that holds the deed to this property. I am the one who filed the trespassing and unauthorized commercial activity reports earlier this afternoon." The deputy nodded, pulling a small notepad from his chest pocket. "Thank you, ma'am. We received an urgent dispatch regarding an illegal short-term rental operation and forced entry. Can you provide identification and proof of ownership?" "Absolutely," I replied, setting my briefcase down on a nearby cocktail table. I retrieved my driver's license and the watermarked county deed, handing both documents directly to the deputy. He inspected them thoroughly, his eyes shifting from the paperwork to my face, verifying my identity. While he reviewed the documents, Mr. Abernathy marched over to us, his face flushed with righteous anger. "Miss Emma," he said sharply, gesturing wildly toward the massive ice sculpture, "this is an absolute ecological disaster. We have heavy commercial vehicles tearing up the protected watershed. We have unauthorized audio equipment violating the local noise ordinances. And I see a family of unknown tourists peering out of the master bedroom window. This is a severe violation of the Preservation Charter." "I know, Mr. Abernathy," I replied smoothly, maintaining my professional composure. "And I completely agree with your assessment. However, as I stated in my report, I did not authorize any of this. I arrived here today to find that these two individuals had broken into my property, changed the locks, and established a fraudulent commercial enterprise without my knowledge or consent." I pointed a firm finger directly at Jason and Jasmine. They were standing huddled together near the pool, looking like terrified children caught stealing candy. The deputy handed my documents back to me and turned his attention to my brother. The officer adjusted his utility belt and began walking slowly across the lawn toward Jason. "Sir," the deputy demanded, his tone dropping to a serious, uncompromising register. "I need you and the lady next to you to step forward right now and provide government-issued identification." Jason swallowed hard, his hands trembling violently as he reached into his back pocket for his wallet. "Officer, please," he stammered, voice cracking pitifully. "I just need to explain a simple misunderstanding." Jason babbled, his hands shaking so violently that he dropped his leather wallet directly onto the damp grass. The tall deputy did not react to his desperate pleading. He maintained a posture of absolute authority. He calmly reached down, picked up the wallet, extracted Jason's driver license, and held his open hand out toward Jasmine. She reluctantly dug into her oversized designer tote bag and handed over her identification. Her face was pale, completely devoid of the arrogant, mocking expression she had worn all afternoon. The officer took both cards, turned his back on them, and walked to his cruiser. He picked up his radio microphone and began running their names through the county database. Meanwhile, the second deputy bypassed the drama on the lawn and marched straight up the wooden porch steps. He entered the house to address the unauthorized occupants. Through the large custom architectural glass windows, I watched the entire interaction unfold with crystal clarity. The deputy approached the father of the Ohio family, who was currently standing in the kitchen, holding a freshly opened bottle of my expensive sparkling water. The officer spoke firmly, gesturing toward the front door. The tourist's face instantly transformed from relaxed vacation mode to utter shock, and then to explosive, terrifying anger. It took less than 15 minutes for the family to completely pack their belongings. They dragged their heavy rolling luggage back across the pristine oak floors, the harsh sound echoing loudly into the tense silence of the front yard. The mother looked absolutely devastated, holding her young daughter tightly by the hand. The father, however, was practically vibrating with rage. He marched out the front door and headed directly toward Jason, closing the distance so fast and aggressively that the primary deputy had to quickly step between them to prevent a physical altercation. "You stole $100,000 from our corporate account," the tourist shouted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "We booked this property for a 6-month executive retreat. You looked me right in the eye, shook my hand, and took our company wire transfer. You are a complete con artist." Jason backed away, holding his trembling hands up like a flimsy shield. "I am not a con artist," he pleaded weakly, his voice cracking under the pressure. "We had a valid lease from my parents. This is just a massive family dispute over the corporate structuring. I will refund your money. I just need a few days to transfer the funds back from our operating account. I do not want your pathetic excuses, the man growled, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at Jason's chest. I want my money wired back to my corporate account by tomorrow morning. If it is not there, my legal department is going to bury you in civil litigation before the criminal courts even get a chance to process you. The family loaded their luggage into their rented luxury SUV, slamming the heavy doors with enough force to physically shake the vehicle. They peeled out of the driveway, kicking up a thick cloud of gravel and dust, leaving Jason and Jasmine standing entirely alone to face the police. The primary deputy returned from his cruiser holding a thick pad of carbon copy citation paper. He tore off 2 yellow sheets and handed one to Jason and one to Jasmine. You are both being officially cited for criminal trespassing, the deputy stated, his voice completely devoid of any sympathy. Because you broke into a secured property and changed the locks without the legal property owner's consent. You are not considered tenants. You have absolutely no squatters' rights here. The officer pulled out a secondary stack of forms from his belt. Furthermore, because you accepted a massive sum of money across state lines for a fraudulent commercial rental agreement, this incident is being immediately escalated to the County Criminal Investigations Division. You are formally accused of commercial fraud. A detective will be contacting you shortly. I highly advise you both to retain criminal defense attorneys immediately. Do not attempt to contact the property owner. Do not return to this address. If you step foot on this property again, you will be arrested on site and held without bail. Before Jason could even begin to process the criminal citations in his hand, Mr. Abernathy stepped forward eagerly, holding out his wooden clipboard. And here is your official notice of violation from the Lake George Ecological Preservation Board. Abernathy announced loudly, practically shoving the paperwork into Jason's chest. This is a formal stop work order. It also details the immediate $30,000 administrative fine for today. You have 14 days to remit payment to the board, or we will place a lien on any personal assets you currently hold. Jason stared blankly at the thick stack of yellow and white legal papers in his hands. It was the physical manifestation of his completely ruined life. The fake real estate empire, the lavish launch party, the arrogant toasts to generational wealth, all of it had vanished. It was entirely replaced by severe criminal charges and crippling financial debt. Jasmine did not even look at her citation. She crumpled the yellow paper in her fist, glaring at me with a hatred so deep it looked toxic. She spun on her designer heel, marching toward their luxury vehicle parked illegally on the grass. She yanked the passenger door open and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind her. Jason stood frozen for another long moment. He looked at our parents who were watching him from the driveway with absolute horror and profound disappointment. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer one last pathetic excuse, but the deputy rested his hand significantly on his utility belt. It is time to leave, sir, the officer commanded firmly. Right now. Jason did not argue. He turned his back on the custom-built Lakeside villa he had tried to steal and slowly walked toward his car. His shoulders were slumped, his expensive suit looking suddenly disheveled and cheap. My parents stood completely frozen on the gravel driveway, watching their golden child get escorted off the premises by armed law enforcement. The illusion was so entirely shattered that they could not even muster the energy to say a simple goodbye. Jasmine was already sitting in the passenger seat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Jason climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The luxury vehicle slowly rolled down the driveway and disappeared out of the iron gates. The deputies stayed on the property until the car turned onto the main highway, ensuring the trespassers were gone. The sudden silence that fell over the property was incredibly peaceful. My parents quietly got into their rusted sedan and drove back to their miserable budget motel without saying a single word to me. They knew there was absolutely nothing left to say. However, the true financial reckoning did not happen on my lawn. It happened 48 hours later, in a cold, sterile legal conference room in downtown Manhattan. The furious father from Ohio was not just a wealthy tourist looking for a weekend getaway. He was the chief executive officer of a massive logistics firm, and he had an entire team of ruthless corporate litigators on his personal payroll. By Monday morning, his legal team had completely cornered Jason and Jasmine. Because Jasmine had stupidly used her personal social security number to secure the $100,000 advance, the executive's lawyers easily bypassed any protective corporate veil. They drafted an airtight, aggressive demand letter, giving my brother exactly 24 hours to return the entire sum, or they would formally press federal wire fraud charges and drag them into a ruinous, highly public civil lawsuit. There was just one massive problem. Jason and Jasmine did not have $100,000. They had already spent over $20,000 on the luxury catering, the live DJ, the designer clothes, and the lavish party rentals. Their personal bank accounts were completely overdrawn. I found out the exact details because Jason actually had the absolute audacity to call me on Tuesday morning, sobbing hysterically and begging for a massive loan to keep him out of federal prison. I politely reminded him that he was the legal manager of his own destiny, declined his request, and hung up the phone. But my brilliant assistant Diana kept a close eye on the public legal filings out of sheer professional curiosity. With their backs completely against the wall, Jason and Jasmine were forced into a brutal legal negotiation. They met with the executive's lawyers under the crushing threat of immediate criminal arrest. The corporate lawyers demanded full and immediate restitution. Since my brother and his wife lacked liquid cash, the attorneys aggressively went after their only remaining tangible asset: their cramped, heavily mortgaged two-bedroom apartment in the city. To avoid serving federal time for grand larceny and fraud, Jason and Jasmine had to sign a legally binding financial settlement agreement. They were forced to formally sign over the entire remaining equity of their city apartment directly to the executive to cover the missing $20,000 and the exorbitant legal fees the executive had incurred over the weekend. The document was an absolute and complete surrender. It legally mandated that they vacate their own apartment within 30 days so the property could be swiftly liquidated. They had tried to steal my parents' secure retirement home to fund their lavish, fake lifestyle. In return, the universe completely stripped them of their own home. They were about to have a new baby, and they were officially facing a terrifying eviction. The sheer irony of the situation was absolutely staggering. Furthermore, the IRS tax investigation was still looming heavily over them, and the Lake George Homeowners Association had successfully placed a $30,000 penalty lien against Jason's name. His credit score was completely destroyed overnight. Jasmine's carefully curated social standing was obliterated. The wealthy friends they had invited to the lake house quickly blocked their numbers, distancing themselves from the massive fraud scandal. Within 3 short days, the self-proclaimed real estate mogul and his visionary wife had lost absolutely everything. They had no investments, they had no home, they had no friends to bail them out. And most importantly, they no longer had my parents' retirement funds to fall back on. They were completely on their own, forced to face the harsh reality of their toxic choices. With Jason and Jasmine thoroughly neutralized by their own monumental greed, there was only one loose thread left to tie. It was time to deal with the enablers who had handed them the scissors. On Thursday morning, I drove my Audi back down the highway to the dilapidated cinderblock motel where my parents had exiled themselves. The crisp autumn air felt incredibly refreshing, a stark contrast to the heavy, suffocating atmosphere that usually surrounded my family. I parked in the cracked asphalt lot and walked straight to room 12. I knocked twice. Heavy footsteps shuffled across the thin carpet, and the door clicked open. My father stood in the doorway wearing the same wrinkled shirt he had worn at the lake house. The room behind him was a depressing disaster. Empty takeout containers were piled high on the small plastic trash can, and the harsh fluorescent light buzzed annoyingly overhead. Susan was sitting on the edge of the stained mattress, staring blankly at a muted television. When she saw me standing in the doorway, a sudden desperate spark of hope ignited in her tired eyes. "Emma," Susan gasped, springing up from the bed. She practically shoved past my father, reaching her hands out toward me. "Oh, thank God. You finally came to your senses. You came to take us home. Tell me the lake house is clean. We simply cannot spend another night in this horrible place. The heater barely works, and the noise from the highway is unbearable." I did not step into the room. I stayed on the concrete walkway and looked at her extended hands, making absolutely no move to take them. "I am not here to take you anywhere, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of the daughterly warmth she was so desperately trying to invoke. "I am here to finalize some paperwork." I opened my leather briefcase and retrieved a thick manila envelope. I pulled out a single, legally notarized document and held it out toward my father. Richard slowly reached out and took the paper, his hands trembling. He looked down at the bold, capitalized heading at the top of the page. Notice of termination of life estate and formal order to vacate. What is this, Emma? My father asked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with a sudden terrifying realization. It is exactly what it says it is, I replied, maintaining a perfectly level professional tone. When you signed that fraudulent power of attorney and voluntarily handed the keys of my property over to Jason, you actively participated in a hostile takeover of my corporate asset. You packed your bags, abandoned your primary residence, and facilitated an illegal commercial enterprise. You broke every single fundamental condition of the life tenant agreement I generously drafted for you. Susan grabbed the paper from my father's hands, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. You cannot do this! She shrieked, her voice echoing off the cheap motel walls. We are your parents. You built that house for us. It was our 30th anniversary present. You cannot just evict us. I did not evict you, Mom, I corrected her firmly. You evicted yourselves. You traded a $400,000 custom-built luxury home for a cheap motel room because you could not bear to tell your golden child no. You enabled his theft. You stood by and watched him disrespect my hard work, my property, and my legal rights. You made your choice entirely clear. You chose him, and by choosing him, you legally and permanently forfeited your right to live on my property. My father slumped against the doorframe, the fight completely draining out of him. Emma, please, he begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. We have nowhere else to go. Jason is completely broke. Jasmine is threatening to leave him. We spent all our savings bailing him out of that crypto scam last year. We cannot afford a new apartment on our Social Security checks. We are entirely destitute. That is a tragedy of your own making, Dad, I said, feeling an incredible sense of absolute closure. For 35 years, you poured every ounce of your love, your money, and your loyalty into Jason. You let him steal my college fund. You let him drain your retirement. You handed him the keys to the only secure thing you had left in this world. You bet your entire lives on him. So I highly suggest you pack your bags and go knock on his apartment door in the city before the bank forecloses on it next week. Susan crumbled. She sank down onto the concrete walkway, sobbing loudly into her hands, screaming about how unfair it all was. She wanted to play the victim one last time, hoping my ingrained guilt would magically reactivate and save her. But the well was completely dry. There was no guilt left. There was no obligation left. I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I wished them no physical harm, but I also owed them absolutely nothing. I turned my back on room 12 and walked toward my car. The engine purred to life, smooth and powerful. I shifted into drive and pulled out of the parking lot, merging onto the highway. I drove back toward the lake house, back toward the sanctuary I had built with my own two hands, finally completely free to enjoy it in total peace. I pulled my Audi through the heavy iron gates and parked on the pristine gravel driveway. The massive cedar doors and architectural glass windows gleamed brilliantly in the late afternoon sun. It was absolutely beautiful. It was a masterpiece of modern design, seamlessly blended with the rugged natural landscape of the ecological preserve. But as I walked up the custom mahogany steps and unlocked the front door, the profound sense of victory I expected to feel simply did not arrive. The silence inside was thick and incredibly heavy. I walked through the high vaulted living room, my heels clicking softly against the oak floorboards. I looked at the pristine white linen sofa, where the oblivious tourists had carelessly thrown their luggage. I looked at the custom kitchen island where Jasmine had smugly waved that worthless power of attorney directly in my face. I walked out to the expansive back deck, staring at the exact spot where Jason had publicly branded me as emotional dead weight while spending my hard-earned money on his lavish party. I had built this place out of a desperate, lingering hope. I had poured an entire year of my life and a massive chunk of my personal wealth into these walls, secretly believing that a beautiful enough gift could finally buy my parents' genuine affection and approval. I thought this house could magically rewrite 35 years of toxic family history. It was a foolish, expensive illusion. The house was not a peaceful sanctuary anymore. It was a physical, unavoidable monument to their boundless greed and my own deeply misplaced guilt. I did not want to spend my weekends sitting on a heated fishing dock, constantly reminded of the people who callously tried to steal it from me. I wanted a completely clean slate. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the premier luxury real estate broker for the Lake George area. We had crossed paths multiple times during the rigorous permitting phase of the construction. He answered on the second ring, sounding pleasantly surprised to hear from me. I told him I was ready to liquidate the asset immediately. I gave him the address and the complete specifications of the custom build. He was absolutely thrilled. Given the high-end luxury finishes, the highly exclusive ecological preserve location, and the current market demand for turnkey vacation properties, he confidently estimated we could list it for nearly double what I had originally invested. I told him to draft the exclusive right to sell agreement right then and send his professional staging crew by Monday morning. I spent the next hour slowly walking through the empty rooms, not packing, but simply letting go. I mentally detached myself from the custom-imported tile work, the heated floors, and the breathtaking panoramic lake views. They were just raw materials. They were just wood and glass and stone. My true value was not tied to this physical property, and it certainly was not tied to the approval of my biological family. I locked the heavy cedar front door for the very last time. I walked down the driveway, got into my car, and started the engine. As I drove out of the gates, a pristine white van with a luxury real estate logo pulled onto the shoulder. Two men got out and began driving a sleek wooden for sale sign deep into the front lawn. I did not even look back in the rearview mirror. The drive back down to Manhattan felt incredibly different this time. The crushing, invisible weight I had carried on my shoulders for my entire adult life was completely gone. I finally understood the true price of ultimate freedom. Sometimes freedom means walking away from the exact people you are biologically programmed to love. It means accepting the harsh reality that you cannot fix a deeply broken dynamic, no matter how much money, time, or emotional energy you pour into it. You cannot buy loyalty from people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. Jason, Jasmine, and my parents were now trapped in a miserable prison of their own design, dealing with federal tax investigations, massive financial ruin, and the total collapse of their toxic ecosystem. I, on the other hand, was driving back to a highly successful career, a peaceful life, and a massive return on my real estate investment. I had finally learned how to fiercely protect my peace. Now I want to turn this conversation over to you. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and walking away is never an easy decision to make. Have you ever had to set a massive non-negotiable boundary with a toxic family member? Have you ever realized that the people who should be protecting you are actually the ones taking advantage of your kindness and generosity? How did you finally break free from that exhausting cycle? And what was the absolute breaking point that made you say, "Enough is enough"? Share your personal stories down below in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I know your experiences can help someone else who might be going through the exact same nightmare right now. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding basic respect.